First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming. My name's Justin Luschner. I work for Tech Alliance. Later on, after Colin goes through the business plan template and describes some of the elements that you have in front of you, some of the headings and some of the details, we're going to ask some of the people in the room that have blue stickers on their name tags, who are mentors or service providers that can also give you some help as you formulate your plans. To get started, I'd obviously like to thank our sponsors. We couldn't do this without them, so thank you very much. So we have the 5 technologies. You're all familiar with them, obviously, by now. Again, I'll reiterate, we have a $10,000 grand prize and 2 prizes of $3,000 for excellence in pitch and excellence in the business plan. So tonight's event is obviously focused on the business plan. So on one of the $3,000 prizes and hopefully the $10,000 prize. And I'll just go through to make sure that everybody's clear about the deadlines for the upcoming milestones. So December 18th is actually the deadline to submit an actual team. The expectation for that is an abstract, which I'll go through in a minute. Stage 2 in the new year will be the actual business plan submissions. Once we have the business plan submissions and we score them, the top business plans will go through to the next round, which is the pitch, which will be the final event in February. So abstract submission, what we expect from that is the project title, team name, be creative, but try not to use any bad words or anything. That'd be nice of you. Description of the team member. So basically, your background. Are you a student? What's your field of expertise? If you've worked in an industry, just to get a sense of who you are. Technology of choice, obviously, and description of the technology and target market. So the description of the technology portion of the abstract, again, we don't want to make this onerous. We just want to get a sense that you comprehend the technology that you're working with. So business plan submission, and I'll hand it over to Colin. He's going to go through the details about what you see in front of you, the template that we're going to use for the competition.
How many are members of a team? Just put your hands up. That is, there's 3 prizes, so the odds of winning a prize are pretty good. You should, really do well. Everybody's going to almost win something. So we want to talk a little bit about the business plan portion. The goal of the business plan portion is very simple. Determine whether this is a viable business in some form. Can this technology be developed into a viable business? Is there a market for the technology, product or service? And then how will you develop, produce, distribute the product or service at a profit? You need to make a profit. How are you going to do it? So it's very simple. All right. How many have written a business plan? Put your hands up. Wow. Very good. We don't want that. Okay? We don't want a 50-page business plan. In fact, it's 4 pages. That means it's going to be very condensed, just highlighting the essential issues. And the essential issues, we think, are on this slide. It's going to gear mostly around determining what the market is. You know what the technology is. The technology's there. What we want to know is what's the market for the technology. And on these slides, I'm going to try to hit on every category and then give a couple of examples. And then we're done. And if there's any questions, just raise your hand or shout out a question. This is informal. This is very informal. If you want to grab more pizza, more drinks, it's fine. Yeah?
Is the slide presentation going to be made available to us?
Armin?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Describe the market, describe the technology, then describe how you're going to get the technology to market. We do not want 3.5 pages on the technology. Right? It really should be the other way around. We want mostly about what is the market and how are you going to get there. Because that's usually the hardest issue. The hardest issue is not usually what the technology is or how you're going to develop the technology, although that is an issue. Usually the hardest issue is what's the market for the technology and really carefully defining that. I want to give an example to start off with. This is an old example. This is started in 1993 as a biotech company out of Montreal called Nexia. And they started off as a company that was going to work on lactose-free milk. It was a project, brand new idea at the time that they were going to work on, but it fell through. The money for that project fell through. So they said, what can we do? So they managed to get some IP around genes from spiders that encode silk. And they thought, I know what we'll do. We'll stick that in goats. And we'll make transgenic goats called spider goats that express the silk in the goat's milk. They raised $70 million. They branded it as BioSteel because they were going to use it as a steel substitute because of the weight ratio of spider silk, not silk in milk, but actual spider silk is very high. And so at the end of the day, it didn't work. And even the founder of the company said BioSteel remains an interesting research project, but the dilemma remains, what is the end use of the product? You cannot start a company today without knowing what the technology is and what the end use is. What market are you going to? You should note that sales of lactose-free milk are over $1 billion now, and had they stayed in that market, they may have been quite successful. This is my generic business slide. If you can solve this, you'll be successful at business. You have a great technology, you have a market need, how do you get those two things to align up, right? It's really easy to present in a picture, it's really easy to say, it's not so easy to do, otherwise everybody would be successful, right? So describe the market. What's the problem that you're going to solve? All of these are technology-based products. They're going to solve a problem in the market. This is not pet rocks, right? Although maybe they are. I haven't looked that closely. How is the problem? So what is the problem? What's the problem the technology is addressing? How is it currently solved? You have to get an idea what the competition is for this market. Once you figure out what market you're going into, what's already out there? How is the problem addressed? Sometimes there's competition, sometimes there's not. It's unusual not to have competition. There must be some way that that problem is being addressed currently. What is the standard way to address that problem? And then, when it comes time to describe your technology, how is it that your technology is better? Are there any costs associated with the problem? And if you alleviate those costs by using your technology, you now have an economic argument for the use of the technology. Size and scope of the problem. This is where we'd like to, if you can, and it'd be very good if you can, be quantitative about the size and scope of the problem. How big is it? Define the customer. You think that's easy. It's not always easy to define who the customer is. Sometimes there's somebody that uses the product. Sometimes there's somebody that decides on whether that product can be used that's different than the user. And then a third party may be who's going to pay for it. And it may not be the first two. But you have to know, for each technology, who the customer is and who's going to pay for it and who's the decision maker. All of those things you have to have a good understanding because you have to know how to approach the market. As an example, DGF is delayed graft function, so just as an example of a market. Delayed graft function is something that happens in transplantation. When an organ from a donor is transplanted into a recipient, it doesn't work very well at the beginning. So in kidney transplant, when this happens, the patient has to go on, it's called supplementary dialysis. So they have to go back on dialysis until that organ kicks in to be fully functional, and then they can come off dialysis. So that's called delayed graft function. The function of the graft is not, it's not fully functional immediately. Well, there's a cost associated with that. You have longer hospitalization times, you have dialysis, you often have more complications. So if you go through all those numbers, and they're all publicly available, you can add them up. You can say the calculated average donor hospitalization cost just due to delayed graft function is $140,000 per patient. There's approximately 22,000 kidney transplants every year from deceased donors. Those are the ones who suffer from delayed graft function. Live donors, their kidneys are fine. There is no delayed graft function. So if you could reduce delayed graft function by 50%, you could easily justify at least $10,000 per patient revenue for whatever technology you have to solve that problem. 10,000 times 22,000, you know you have a market of at least $220 million a year. And that's calculating the cost just based on hospitalization costs, nothing else. So probably you can charge more. So be quantitative when you're going through your market analysis, as quantitative as possible. Each technology is going to be different. Each technology is going to have its own hurdles. It's going to have its own market. So, you know, it's hard to have a blanket statement. Be as quantitative as possible. So there's a current example. This is ScarX Therapeutics out of Toronto. They're a small little biotech company, startup. They have a cream that will reduce scarring due to surgery. There's at least 100 million patients per year who undergo surgery. So how are they going to get to market? Their plan to go to market is not just in general surgery, but to go for cosmetic or reconstructive surgery, because the need to prevent scarring is highest there. So the problem is more severe, and you're more likely to, people will want to pay to solve that problem. So there's about 6.3 million procedures per year globally, about 1.6 million per year in the US. So you can start to do some calculations now of what your market size is. Who's the customer? Well, that's not such a simple question. Who benefits? Well, the patient benefits because their scars are not as severe as without the product. Who uses it? The surgeon uses it. The patient is unconscious. They don't know if they're getting the cream. Who buys it? Well, the surgeon buys it. So you have to convince the surgeon that it's worthwhile to add to their standard practice. Who pays for it? The patient pays for it. It's just passed through. Maybe insurance pays for it if it works well enough, although cosmetic and reconstructive surgery is not always covered by insurance. Competition. They say on their website nothing else is approved to specifically prevent surgical scarring, and that's probably true. That doesn't really tell you the whole story, though. Don't write that on your business plan. Write whatever the standard practice is to prevent scarring. Because there may be nothing specifically approved for it, but there may be standards, there may be certain things that are done to reduce scarring. And that's what you're competing against. So you have to be better than that. Okay. Describe the technology. I have a fair number of slides on this, but we don't want the business plan to be overloaded with describing the technology. It is mostly about the market and how to get there, but you need to describe your technology in such a way that we understand how you're going to get it to market. In other words, what does your technology do? Why is it better than the competition? And what do you need to do to fully develop the technology? So is it ready to go? Are these technologies ready to go on for sale tomorrow, or do you need to do something before that can happen? If you need development, what does the pathway look like? What is the technology hurdles, IP opportunities or hurdles, regulatory hurdles? What's required in terms of cost and time, roughly? Right? Just to get an idea. Every technology has its own development pathway. This is a generic slide. It doesn't apply, each technology is going to be different depending where it's at in its development pathway. But the common issues around technology development include intellectual property, the competition's intellectual property, so your analysis of the market and your look at competitors, you'll take a look at what intellectual property they may have as well. Manufacturing. That's often an issue, depending on the technology. There may be a lot of regulations around manufacturing. And how you're going to get it to market. Are you going to commercialize it? Are you going to license it out? How is that going to happen? That's actually the third part, but just jumping ahead there. I'm not going to dwell on IP. It is not the most important thing in the business plan. IP, I believe IP exists in all these technologies. Yeah? Okay. What you want to understand, though, and so you might leave IP blank on your business plan description, but you do want to understand the role of IP in your business. You're going to look at your business strategy, and then you're going to create an IP strategy, and you want to make sure that they're aligned. There's no point in creating IP if you're not going to use it. So what IP will be created by your business? Is it the IP that exists, or during the development, are you going to create additional IP? That could be very important. It could add to the value of the technology. What IP is required to practice your business? So having IP doesn't mean you get to use it. Having IP means you get to prevent others from infringing. So you want to make sure that you're not infringing anyone else by practicing your IP. And then in theory, what IP, if you know, would maximize the value of your business? And should you aim to get that? What regulations do you need to meet, if any, depending on your technology, depending on the field of use? Are there any regulatory hurdles you need to overcome? If there are, you should just state, you're going to need to do this, and this is how you do it. Lastly, describe how the technology gets to market. You're going to commercialize it, you're going to create a corporation, produce it and sell it. Are you going to license it to somebody who does that? You're going to develop it and then license it to someone who does that? Think about the best way to commercialize the technology. And so I'm not going to go through each one, but those are some of the types of questions that you'll want to address in figuring out how you're going to commercialize the technology. And each technology is going to be different, right? There's no one way of doing it. I just want to say, before I forget, when you're doing your market analysis and you're looking at competition and you're looking whether there's any competitive patents out there, think of your competitors. They are competitors, and you've got to figure out how do you carve out the market for your technology. But keep in mind that competitors are also potential partners. Right? So when you look at the competition out there, if you don't see any competition, to me, that's actually a red flag. Like, why isn't there somebody else out there in that market space? Is it just because you're so revolutionary and so brand new, you're the first to market? Maybe, but that may be the case. But if there are competitors, it's not a bad thing. They are often partners. Understand the scale of the opportunity. This is important in deciding how you're going to commercialize your product. Are you making 10 items per year for $1 million each, $10 million market? Or are you making 1 million items for $10 each? It's also a $10 million market, but it's very different in how you go about doing it. I think this is the final example. This is a product called EcoNiche. Anybody know EcoNiche? No? This is a vaccine. Who's heard of E. coli 0157? Anybody from Walkerton? No? So E. coli 0157 is really bad E. coli. It makes a toxin. It can cause kidney failure and death. And unfortunately, some people suffered from kidney failure from the Walkerton water tragedy. It's found in cattle. It doesn't cause any problem to the cattle at all, but that's generally where it comes from. So reservoirs in cattle, cattle poop on the fields, goes into the water supply, gets on the vegetables, and if appropriate sanitary practices are not followed, it can get into your bottled water, it can get into your vegetables, and you see in the news all the time recalls due to E. coli, right? So a scientist at UBC, Brett Finlay, identified a way to prevent E. coli colonization in cattle through vaccination. He had this idea. He's been studying bacterial adherence for since the early 80s, when he did his PhD in Edmonton. And he thought, I can make a vaccine in cattle that'll prevent E. coli from adhering to the intestine. And he thought he could do it. He did it. Scientifically, it works. So your science hurdle, so if you look at technology, you'll have a science hurdle. Check. It works. You have a regulatory hurdle. It was approved by the regulators. No problem. Health Canada, Canadian Food Inspection Agency approved it. Manufacturing, they built a GMP manufacturing plant, spent at least $25 million on that. So you can make it. Unfortunately, no one would buy it. There was no market for it. There's a need for it. There's just no market for it. No one would pay money for that vaccine. And so no matter how good your technology, no matter how good your business plan, no matter how good your execution, if no one's willing to pay for it, there's no company, there's no technology commercialization happening. That's why the focus in the business plan is defining the market. Keep it as simple as possible. You can have the right product in the right market, using the right technology and having the right team, but keep it simple. This is a simpler technology than the ones you're looking at. But it's worked, and I'm not advertising. This is our Western alumni who successfully figured out that they could make craft beer for the local market and have been successful doing so. Align the technology with the market and focus on the business. And that's it. Just to reiterate, that's the idea for the 4-page business plan. Okay? It's just that simple. Any questions? No? All right. It's super clear, Justin. Everybody understands what to do.